Okay, so hello everyone in person and also to the people that joined us online. Thanks for being here. This is the session of the Harmonized Terminologies and Schemas for Fair Data in Material Sciences and Related Domains Working Group, or the HarmonisedMatChem Working Group for short, because this is quite a long name. So before we start, So before we start, just a reminder on the RDA 6 guiding principles that are at the very heart of the community. Just as a reminder for us all. And now some introductions. My name is Athena. I work for RDA Europe and RDA Tiger, and I'm the working group facilitator. And here you can see the working group co-chairs. With us today in person, we have Zachary Trotz right here. Online, Gerhard Goldbeck, and I think also Masashi Isi was able to join us online. And also 3 more coaches that couldn't be here, Isolde Lynch and Kwang Rio Lee and Leah McEwen. So this is our agenda for today. I'm going to leave this slide. Please make sure to sign in the collaborative notes and leave your contact details. That would be really helpful. We're going to start with a presentation and an overview of the working group streams that structure the work of the working group, updates on the stream A and stream B. Then hopefully we're going to engage in a nice discussion over developments that the working group members have come up with in these 2 streams. Then we're going to have 2 lightning talks, one on the schema.org and then fair mappings intervention. So thank you, Jan, for joining as well. And finally, we're going to look into the future steps for the working group. So this was just a very brief introduction of what we're going to do today. And now the floor is yours, Zach. Thank you.
Did everyone have time to get into the collaborative notes? Let me try that. Everyone good? All right, so I'm going to start off the discussion with a quick overview of the working group streams. So first, the objectives of the group. Our group got endorsed just before the last plenary meeting, and our overall objectives are centered around increasing the uptake of the fair data principles in the chemical and materials research domains. And our working objectives are to collect and review existing vocabularies and terminologies, semantic assets within these domains, propose and verify best practices for people within the material science community, the data stewards who are help putting these ideas into action, identify future needs for harmonization of these terminologies and semantic assets, and then finally demonstrate successful implementation in certain use cases. So our planned outputs, that's interesting. A review and fair maturity assessment of the existing things that are out there, as well as a proposal of a fair maturity model for the semantic assets themselves. And of course, we're leaning heavily on existing work and packaging it for a particular domain. B, best practice recommendations for material science practitioners. And I think what we mean by that are the data stewards, the people who are helping support the bench scientists. And finally, potentially new semantic artifacts that harmonize the gaps and the overlaps within the domain. So within our proposal, a lot of ideas came up, and we sort of binned those into sort of dedicated streams. And you're not meant to read this, but we came up with sort of a detailed work plan of things we could do within these work streams. So they're centered around collecting and reviewing these existing semantic artifacts and assessing their fair maturity, developing these best practices for the practitioners. So those are the 2 streams that we've started working on. And right now, as we'll present in the next few minutes, they're sort of an outline stage. We spent a lot of time thinking about what we want to discuss before we really start writing. So we're really in a position to go from a detailed outline to actual written text for the first 2 stream documents. And finally, we're using this meeting to start to think about how we kick off stream C. So this is a zoomed in view of this document, and if somebody wants to actually look at it, we have a link to that we can put in the collaborative notes. So overall progress, just a high level. So within our working group, we've had a lot of collaborative ideation of what we want to say in these documents, again, referencing existing work, and we've done a tremendous amount of collaborative outlining of what's going to be in these documents. And I think up next is really writing the paragraphs to go inside these outlines. And I just want to highlight that we're not reinventing the wheel. We want to rely heavily on existing outputs from other working groups within the RDA or beyond the RDA, and cite their work and put it in the context of material science and engineering as well as chemistry. So Stream A progress. I will turn that over to my online colleague, Gerhard.
Thank you.
And I guess you can say next, and I'll push the button.
Will do. So, okay, let's go ahead to the next slide then. Yeah, so what we have done online, and you can see the Stream A document. I think we're going to also have the link there for you online, where we have the context, the definitions, and then we had a look at the fair maturity indicators for semantic artifacts. There's been quite a substantial amount of work, which we could use, in particular from the FAIR's FAIR project. I think Jan is over there and he knows that very well. So great work there. And thanks for that. There has been some updates on that. Then we have the findings and discussion section. But as Zach said, that needs to be further fleshed out. If you go to the next slide. Yeah, so I just want to highlight a few facts here that we collected. So the target group of Stream A are the creators of semantic artifacts in particular. So there is a need to improve sharing interoperability across the subdisciplines of materials and related domains, right? So there's the question then, what is a common data structure, data model, as common as possible, while supporting specific research data for subdisciplines? And what are the disciplinary language barriers that impede effective sharing of concepts? So this is what we want to address. But also, we had significant input and requests for addressing AI-ready materials research data. So again, supporting that with explicitly defined data and vocabularies, and understandable context of the data, so the data structures. So it's very much related to the first points, but with a more directed user case, let's say. Then we have the fair maturity of the semantic artifacts. There's some questions open about what the stages of maturity, what does fair maturity mean, and why do we need it for semantic artifacts? And with the fair maturity indicators, are we assessing semantic artifacts or the data sets? The two via FAIR are obviously, this is how we set up the group, very much linked. So in the end, it's about the data sets, but you can only do that if we have the semantic artifacts and they need to be fair in themselves. So the next slide. Yeah, we have collected, more or less reviewed FAIR indicators. So the background is in publications and output from the FAIR's FAIR project, which was a European project. There were 17 recommendations related to FAIR principles. And the group here added some further indicators, especially around formats and standards, and also canonical terminologies. And then we grouped them via FAIR, and also then made subcategories. And I actually saw the earlier presentation in the FAIR mapping, and I think there's also some similar categories coming up. So metadata relevant to F and R, identifiers for fairness, for findability, repositories, findability APIs and protocols for accessibility, licensing for accessibility and reusability, policies for accessibility, formats and standards for interoperability and reusability, provenance also for the same, and mappings and alignments. And yeah, I think that's probably already it. If you go to the, not sure. Yeah. So what we need, and I just put that in the collaborative notes as well, we obviously need to review those and then further describe, especially the new ones. For the existing recommendations, they're already well described in the background documents. And then we also want to use these indicators, at least in some key cases, to look at existing semantic artifacts in material science and related domains. So we have initial collections, and so anyone who can contribute to utilizing the indicators and see where we are in our field, that would be good. But in general, the message is that we need better canonical general semantic artifacts that can support fair data in the material sciences. So that's where we are at the moment.
Thank you, Gerhard. So I'll go ahead and speak on Stream B progress. So as Gerhard noted, Stream A and the Stream A document is really targeting the producers or creators of semantic artifacts. And I would say that the Stream B document is targeting the consumers of semantic artifacts, specifically like the data stewards or repository owners. And as Gerhard noted, the document structure for Stream A is organized by the FAIR and the FAIR data principles. And we chose to sort of take the transpose of that for the data consumers, or excuse me, for the consumers of semantic artifacts, where we thought about structuring the document around a canonical data workflow, where you have certain elements in the research lifecycle of planning for data acquisition, acquiring your data, processing your data, analyzing it, preserving it, and sharing it. So we chose to structure our document around that canonical data lifecycle and thinking about what do semantic assets mean in the context of planning or acquiring data. So we think about it, we're organizing the document firstly around the canonical data lifecycle, and then thinking about the semantic artifacts that enable elements of the FAIR data principles within each of those. So just talking about those, or the current document outline within those elements of the data lifecycle. Within planning, we're thinking about covering elements of the data management plan, searching for existing semantic assets, creating data dictionaries, dealing with physical samples, dealing with research code, both how do you deal with existing instrumentation, or if you're procuring new instrumentation, there's an opportunity to put elements of your procurement, of the FAIR data principles in your procurement. In the acquire element, leveraging programmatic interfaces and automation is something we want to discuss. Automating data and metadata collection, collecting other metadata, and thinking about access control and ownership. And one of the things we'll talk about in the collaborative section is what's missing, what shouldn't be there. So keep that in mind. During the process element of the data lifecycle, extracting data and metadata from proprietary file formats. That's not an issue in all domains, but it's a major one in our domain. And using non-proprietary file formats to the extent possible, automating data processing pipelines or workflows, and thinking about provenance. And again, all of these things have been discussed before in various documents, thinking about data planning, management planning more broadly. And we really want to zoom in on where these intersect the use and reuse of semantic artifacts. And then in the analysis box, what we've got so far is thinking about making data analysis and visualization reproducible and the provenance. And finally, for preservation and sharing, data documentation, data versioning, repository selection, and then sharing, I think, the sort of expected ones of publishing data code and papers. And again, we're looking for your input on where we're going with our documents. So with that, we're going to send people to the Stream A document. And Gerhard, I wonder if you want to after we wait for a few moments for people to navigate to the document, I wonder if you'd like to share your screen. Oh, is that the wrong link?
For some reason it's malfunctioning, but I've updated the online slides.
Okay. Well,
Sorry about this. No. Okay.
there are links in the collaborative notes. I also just put the link into
The Zoom?
Zoom.
Okay, sorry about this, everyone. Malfunction. Has everyone found their way in the collaborative? Oops, yeah.
We're in Philippines.
So, can I have yeah.
Yeah, here you go.
So okay, you're not all in the Zoom, I take it. Sorry about this hiccup. Okay, could do it like that. Okay, let me.
And yeah, Gerhard, when you were sharing, can you go back to sharing? Can you show everyone how to get into suggestion mode of Google Docs? Gerhard, can you unmute? And there is, in the toolbar, there is a document zoom button. You could probably go up to 150% in your view.
Okay, so hopefully you can hear me. And let's zoom in a bit.
Yep.
Is that reasonably okay there?
Yeah, that looks good. And I think we can encourage everyone to jump into the document, and please switch to suggestion mode and feel free to make comments, either using the commenting feature or add bullets, text, feedback in the document itself. Suggestion mode will help us if we need to follow up with you to follow up with you. Does anybody need help identifying suggestion mode? There's a little button at the top right that Gerhard is showing, and that should allow you to leave suggestions inside the document. So I think with that, I can hand it over to you, Gerhard, to talk through the current state of the document.
Yeah, just to describe where we are at. So at the top, these are the questions to address in context, and of course you are more than welcome to add further questions that you would like us to address and that you would like this to take into account. Then we have a section on definitions. This is not filled in, but we have, again, background documents from the FAIRS Fair that cover a lot of those, and they will be done collaboratively as well. And, please chip in at any time to do that, especially if there are certain things that you would like to, close to your heart, as it were, and would like to contribute to. Now we get into the meat of the FAIR indicators. So again, that references the background document, and these recommendations on the indicators come with a P-Rec in front of them here, like P-Rec 3. Come from that document. So they are just referenced here by the kind of headline, as it were, by one sentence or phrase, but they have a full description in the document, so we can really just adopt that. Obviously, we can also further review it. What we need support on is the ones that have been added here, or that may be just a further detail on already existing ones, or maybe really new ones. In particular, when you come to the formats and standards. So there's been quite detailed recommendations that we have had from members and from contributors here. So this is all in what we need is, you know, some further descriptions in some cases where we just have, you know, a line or a phrase. I'm particularly interested in, and I think I can say, you know, we are particularly interested in how this applies to our field. This is what this group is for. And then we come to the question when we have, okay, you should reference established canonical source domain terminologies. As I said, okay, what are these? So some of that will be the work of Stream C, where we're going to look at these, you know, harmonized semantic artifacts that we in our field can use. But already here, we want to, you know, apply all of this to the existing ones. So if you can contribute any ones that are semantic artifacts that are particularly important for your work, and that we could then put to the test, as it were, in terms of how established canonical they are and how they fulfill the other indicators, that would be a fantastic example for our output report. You know, we can't really apply this to everything, you know, to all of the semantic artifacts, but we could consider a few, and then a few important ones, and then see where we stand in the field.
Gerhard, would you like to go through each of the FAIR principles and ask for reactions and suggestions from the audience on each one?
Sure. So I can't see everything here in terms of if there's something in the chat now. Okay, so in findability here, we need the metadata, so rich metadata about the usage of the semantic asset and its limitations. And we already have the recommendation of a common minimum metadata schema must be used to describe semantic artifacts and their content.
Any reactions to yes, Jan?
Yeah, so Jan Lefranc here. Those online, I contributed to the FAIR recommendations. In there, we have a proposal for a minimum metadata set for semantic artifacts that you should consider, which is aligned to DCAT and leverage an ontology that describes ontology that's called MOD. And there is some work now in FAIR Impact, which follows up FAIR is FAIR on exactly the same thing. I'm actually looking at the deliverables so you can actually get pointers to them. And the idea is that this metadata schema helps structuring APIs for ontology repository as well. So you would harmonize the way you get content. So I'll try to add the links to the document.
Oh, go ahead.
Thanks. I mean, if there are, I mean, what my take on this, and this is, you know, what I would also like to see any reactions or comments on, is basically when we talk about metadata, then what are they describing, right? I mean, so for example, if you have the DCAT, then you know, it's a data set metadata, right? So you ensure that the data set is well described. What we sometimes struggle with then, I now want to describe not just a data set, I want to describe something more about the material science application in the data set. So I can of course, you know, if I have semantic assets that I may want to use for annotating, you know, specific material science data. So I for example, can find you know, vocabularies, terminologies for electron microscopy, right? Then I need to understand in all of these data sets that I find in also on portals, ontologies and so on, what are they actually for in terms of the application field. Has that been taken into account when you look at, you know, findability in terms of, okay, what is an appropriate data set if I want to do, you know, certain type of spectroscopy or whatever? And I mean, I can just do a keyword search. Is that sufficient, or can we have more rich metadata about the usage of that and the usage, the application, the material science or science, the sort of domain application field?
So just to clarify, so I understand. So what you want to differentiate data set from ontologies. So the reason why we use DCAT is because we consider that OntoPortal is a collection of ontologies, and ontologies could be considered as data set. It's a special kind of data set where it contains concepts, relation, and a lot of metadata describing them, including also some formal logic associated to it. So our intentions was to align and say just it's a special kind of data. Now we're using MOD, which is a specialized vocabulary that's been, or metadata ontology that's been developed merging existing previous ontologies that have been used for describing the ontologies themselves, right? The semantic assets. And so when we defined the minimum metadata schema, the idea was, of course, aligning DCAT, but that's not the most important. The most important part was the use case associated with it is what is the necessary information you need at minimum to find the proper ontology you're looking for. So and so that is the key question. So I don't know, I don't think we answered that question in the first pass of Ferris Fair, but everything is online and accessible. So it could be nice also to contribute from your side, extending the metadata scheme, the minimum metadata schema. Just bear in mind that MOD is used in AgroPortal, so maybe you could look into that resource to see how it's used. It contains 135 descriptors of ontology. So I think you'll find plenty of metadata fields there you can reuse for describing your material science ontologies. Of course, not the specific domain-specific concepts, but for saying what an ontology does and containing that information that's there.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some of that also in presentation. So this is I don't want to you know, touch what the existing recommendations, because I think it's absolutely the right one in terms of a common minimum metadata schema, and DCAT and so on are great for that. But there's always, I mean, the interface between the sort of data view on things, so schemas, semantic artifacts, and so on are kind of data, and we need to describe them appropriately, and then the domain level aspects. Yeah, I mean, we're having the same discussion at the moment also. Okay, I'm sort of going a little bit ahead of things, because we want to discuss that in the stream C when you look at schema.org. So typically all of the things in the data set in Google are annotated by the data aspects of schema.org, not any other aspect of it. Even though, for example, they have a data type, as an example, called volcano. So if you have specific volcano data, you can put them with that data type, but that's actually currently not even used when you in the Google datasets annotation. But so of course you need to then also use it. But if you had data types for material and you have datasets that have that data type, you will find datasets more easily, you would think, if the systems are set up like that, that are about materials in a sense, in a material science sense, and not in any other sense. So I just wanted to sort of explain a little bit where I'm coming from, and where this group is, in my view, should also work, or is working, is how can we enhance all of these fantastic recommendations. And we, first of all, of course, need to apply all of these recommendations themselves, but then also want to enhance them with things that make the domain, make it easier to express domain knowledge, and make that domain knowledge itself fair.
Are there any other? Oh, wonderful.
I'm just wondering if there's ability to provide templates for these, so that way folks can kind of fill things in that way. And I'm new to this area, and so maybe that's a naive question, but I found that templates can be really useful and helpful.
Yes, not at all naive. I totally agree. Yes, that's something we need to note, and we actually haven't done, but we need to do that. Yeah.
A follow-up question on that, on templates. Are you familiar with the fair implementation profile, and would that be a good example, or did you think of something? Were you thinking of something else?
I'm just thinking, folks are hopefully filling out READMEs or things like that already, and if there can be some kind of script written to take the README and feed it from like an API into something else. I'm not familiar with what you had mentioned.
Perfect. Thanks for the clarification. And I saw a hand over here.
Isn't that something what is in science on schema.org? Because there is template for creation of not really ontology. In this case, it's vocabulary, which together creates a ontology. Because there is a template called so from science or something like that.
All right. Any other reactions to the metadata part of findability? So Gerhard, do you want to ask if anything's missing from findability, and talk about the two other things we have there, identifiers and repositories, and see if we want to get any audience reaction to what's under findability, what's missing? Go ahead, Gerhard.
Yeah, so under the identifiers and repositories, we have some extra items here. Also, they are, I think, actually already covered in the existing recommendation. So on the whole, we have the globally unique persistence and resolvable identifiers. So and of course, each term has to have a PID. That's kind of implied here, I think, as well. Then on the repository side, searchable resources, so published in appropriate semantic repository. I think the build semantic artifact search engines that operate across different semantic repositories was a recommendation there, and this comes that's very much linked, I think, here to the searchable resources, and it's a state-of-the-art thing that would be interesting also to get your comments. I'm not sure what the very latest on that is, whether there are actually now improvements or further work on search engines that can operate across the different types of repositories that that exist, because that is definitely currently, I would say, a findability issue, but I would love to have your input on that.
Are there any reactions in the room or online? If folks online would like to raise your hand, I think somebody will see it. But any reactions in the room to these last two elements of findability before we move on? I think you can go to accessibility, Gerhard.
Yeah, on the accessibility, it's first of all, API protocols are very important. These are also reflected in the already existing recommendations that we have open and at least and ideally standard protocols for the semantic assets and also sub-elements of the semantic assets. So this is again kind of diving deeper into them. I mean, some of the semantic assets I think can be, quite large, larger ontologies and so on. So one might actually want to actually go further into these and via APIs. Any comment on that, on the protocols and APIs?
Yeah, so I totally agree with that. I mean, if you need to search, I mean that's related to findability, right? If you need to search something, if your ontologies are on GitHub, forget about it, right? So you need real dedicated ontology repositories. Now these repositories, they need to have a clear and well-described API, and not just for humans, right? I mean, if you want to make them fair, that needs to be machine actionable. So there are standards that could be used. OpenAPI is one. Although it's been done to generate human documentation, it's a structured representation of the API calls and the information about that. So you can certainly write scripts to actually work with it and automatically connect. But that's one of the challenges that needs to be taken into account. And in Fair Impact, the work that's been done around the metadata is actually to say, if we agree on this common metadata format, right, and how we structure the information in the repository, or at least the metadata information, then we could harmonize the APIs. And we could use a common API model that we proposed in a deliverable I put in findability. But the idea is that if all the repository implement that, then that's much easier to actually get the information from the large diversity. However, that requires for each of these repositories to update their API and suddenly update also their internal model. So it's going to be costly and lengthy to get there. But yeah, we definitively have better solutions. One of the attempts we did, and I'm sorry, I'm hijacking talking, but I've been working so much on this. In Fair is Fair, at the end, in the last deliverable, we're describing a technological approach to actually collect and aggregate metadata from the various ontology repositories. And the idea of the system is that you register the API of the repo, identify the calls you need to get all the metadata, automatically harvest the metadata, reconstruct the schema, which is nice because you will see errors in the schema, and then you map it to DCAT and publish it into a fair data point. And actually in the GitHub repo, you have the implementation of that. And there what you get is a fair data point that contains all bioportal, I think bioportal, agroportal, the NERC vocabulary service, and there is a fourth one I don't remember, which is all aligned. So the whole metadata is harmonized. Of course, not perfectly, so there are things to work on. And I think that's the way to go for findability and also for accessibility. If we harmonize the APIs, then you can have this kind of tools. You can index concepts and then use these concepts when you build your own ontologies.
Thank you. Any other reactions to accessibility? Anyone online would like to say anything?
Well, if I may add myself, that week, I mean, recently, come across, and maybe someone here has any comments on that. Okay, we look at this from the if we look at this from the creator of semantic assets. Yeah, of course we should put the semantic assets into the repository, but we're currently also looking for ways of doing this in an automated fashion. So if you develop your semantic asset, your ontology, whatever, in GitHub repository, you don't want to ask a human all the time to upload into a portal. You want to do that automatically. So it's not just the end user access to these in terms of protocols. It should be the whole workflow, right, from the creator of the semantic asset to the user of the semantic asset should be actually done via standard protocols.
I agree also. I mean, workflows for building ontologies and managing ontologies are very important. Just want to mention that OntoPortal allow automatic harvesting from GitHub. My first ontology was on GitHub. I just provided the link, some metadata to BioPortal. It uploads the file if you give it the proper link, and then parse the file and make it available through API so you can navigate and get access to all the concepts, the metadata of the ontology, the metadata of the concepts, the relations, and the associated metadata. That you cannot do in GitHub, right? And I think that's why repositories are important. It's like they will parse the file without you having to do so, because parsing our file and ontologies from others might be a risky business.
Yep.
Because you get a lot of surprise on badly formed OWL and this kind of thing. So now, of course, we have Shackle that could help and this kind of things, but still, you have a lot of issues. And they are doing the job for you. So basically, that's why I'm saying it's like you can get your thing in GitHub, work the flow, and then they automatically harvest. So I think this is a key functionality that needs to be guaranteed or ensured as a requirement for any repository that does the work.
Yeah, yeah.
Continuing on that, so how do you suppose, or what is your idea on the versioning of those kind of things that are maintained in GitHub? So if you need to create, as Jan mentioned, a metadata record before you give the URL to the content in the GitHub, and if you don't want to override the content with the when it's updated in the GitHub, but you want to create a new version and have kind of like different versions of the semantic artifact available at the same time. How would that work automatically without any user intervention? That would
in the Git. Sorry, I mean, what I meant is in the GitHub, of course, it's a user, it's a community of developers and so on working. It's a user, human intervention. Of course, that makes a release and so on. But the workflow from there to the portals, I mean, I trust what Jan's saying. This is already there. It can be automated, but it's maybe not that widely known and used. When I look at the existing portals in material science, MatPortal, Industry Portal, it's full of ontologies that have been uploaded by humans and then not updated to the latest release version and so on, right? So I'm just reflecting the current practice that we have the portal, we have people working on GitHub, but somehow we have a situation that we don't really have the semantic assets that are out there in the updated versions on the existing portals. So something somewhere is not known or not working or whatever. Yeah.
Any final reactions?
So I don't know how the OntoPortal does the automated update, but one way of doing that could be that, for example, there is a trigger in the or a webhook related to KIT tags, for example, and then when that happens, it gets either pushed or pulled to the repository.
Thank you. Shall we go on to interoperability, Gerhard?
Yeah, then on the interoperability side, mappings, very important. Okay, we'll hear more about that as well. Later, rich and comprehensive mappings to other semantic assets, connection to well-known top and middle level ontologies. So here we also then have the question, okay, well-known, which ones are they? We have some of the existing recommendations. And again, reference established canonical source domain ontologies. So this is where we need to work on what are the ones that we want to recommend here. We have quite a lot of detailed recommendations. I can't and won't read out in right now about the formats and standards that support interoperability. In particular, serialization in textual machine readable formats such as JSON LD is important here. And again, how we incorporate the existing domain standards. Any comments on the interoperability?
Not seeing anything locally. Anything online? Oh.
Marta.
Yes,
Yeah,
hi. Am I audible?
Yes.
Excellent. The internet connection is very unstable. So I have a comment on the serialization. I think that from my point of view, the recommendation should be that all those serializations should be available for a given semantic asset. So JSON LD might be preferred for a specific community. I think in the community where I'm mainly active, I think Turtle is definitely more preferred. I think the least preferred is actually XML, but the good practice we try to follow when we advise domain experts also from the material science and engineering is that we try to advise them to actually provide all those three serializations in their assets, not to choose one, but just provide them all. If they prefer to work with one of those when they develop the ontology, is their choice. We always recommend Turtle for some practical reasons, but I would say that the recommendation here should be to provide all of them.
Thank you. Please add it in the comments here or on the collaborative notes as well, so we keep track of that. That would be fantastic.
Yeah. Okay. I'm doing it now. In the comments.
Thanks so much. Yeah.
Are there other comments or reactions to what Gerhard was saying or what Marta was saying? I think we can move to reusability.
Yeah. So licensing, we had a few comments, I think, also earlier on, which I may have missed, but permissive licenses are in general called for semantic assets, right? So if we want to have semantics, it's got to be shared semantics. So we're not talking about the data here. We're talking about the metadata and schema and so on. So that is very important, obviously. Whereas the recommendation is that they must be clearly licensed for use by machines and humans. Yeah, everyone in this group has emphasized the importance of kind of permissive or open licenses. Then we have a number of other things coming up, especially around the alignments again and the formats and standards, data structures with low human dependence and high preservability, written in accordance with international standards, to support also the reusability here. Otherwise, it reflects, in contrast to the FAIR, we've structured it like that, and meaning that some of the recommendations actually come up in more than one area, as I already indicated in my summary. Are there any comments on that?
Anything in the room or online? I think we can keep going then.
Yeah, that's pretty much it for me. And I don't want to take too much time as well, because we've got other streams to go through.
Yeah, so I think we can switch to Stream B. I put the link into Zoom to get to the Stream B document. It's also in the collaborative notes. I'll go ahead and share my screen then. Yes.
Is anyone in the room that doesn't have access to the collaborative notes? Can help. I found it. Are you all there? Okay. And people online, I think it's a bit easier. So if we're all in the collaborative notes, it's great. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm seeing my screen. Let me make this a little bigger. See what we can do here. Yeah, I think that looks fine. So as I mentioned in the slide presentation, we created a figure around sort of canonical data lifecycle. I leaned on the one that was created by the USGS and sort of put in the concepts of the fair data principles, sort of intersecting the data lifecycle. In other words, that they're orthogonal to it. So we were thinking about writing recommendations. Again, this is targeting the end user of semantic artifacts, the data stewards, the data managers, the people creating systems and services to help research staff. So under the plan element, we've thought about having subsections on these elements: data management planning, searching for existing semantic artifacts, creating data dictionaries, dealing with physical samples, dealing with research code, and both dealing with existing or purchasing new equipment or instruments. Are there thoughts or reactions either online or in the room? First and foremost, what do people think about structuring the document around a data lifecycle itself? Is that a good idea? I'm seeing some nod heads. Good, great. And now under the plan element, is there anything missing? And if so, raise your hand. And if you want to add suggestions of things to look at for each of these sub elements, like with instruments and PIDs for instruments, for example, please go ahead and make comments or suggestions. Are there any people who want to react in the room and say anything or online? I'm not seeing anything. Oh, yes, Jan. Perfect.
Maybe just a clarification. So you're saying that this data lifecycle representation is for data stewards, right? So what's the relation with the semantic artifacts here?
Yeah, I think that's the good question. So I'll try to answer it by putting myself in the shoes of a data steward. And this is an individual who people from throughout the laboratory, either doing computational material science or experimental material science, they're going to be coming to this data steward for help. And I think we can help the data steward by categorizing and thinking about semantic artifacts through different stages of the research data lifecycle, such that when the data steward is talking to the bench scientist, they can structure and categorize their conversations about this is what we're going to do and how we're going to support you when you're working on data planning or data acquisition or data analysis. So that was my thought for sort of structuring it that way.
Does that mean that you want to build an ontology about the activities of data stewards in this different management, or you want to identify the ontologies that would be useful for each of the stages?
The second one, the semantic artifacts that are useful for each of these stages in the data lifecycle. Yes.
That is going to be a huge task. Because the description here, it's a good idea. It's a great idea because I think it's going to be a valuable resource for data stewards. Now, it's really granular. I don't know if you're going to find many ontologies about data management plans or, so already we have had this experience with Gerhard on material science and manufacturing, finding ontologies out there. It's tough. It takes a lot of time and effort, and so yeah. Although I don't have a proposition, the only thing I can say is like maybe that's going also to be community to community dependent. So what you mentioned earlier is the fair implementation profile. Maybe that would be a good tool to help you build this kind of things, because the idea of the fair implementation profile is to go to a community and say, guys, what do you want to use to make your data fair? And describe it. So basically it's a table with questions. Which ontologies do you want to use for this stage or this part, and so on. So that might be something extremely useful. And in that context, I would go to the colleagues from World Fair project, because there was a nanomaterial use case where they filled in a FIP. So maybe you could discuss with them and see how they come up and see how you can link the things.
Yes, thank you. Those are great suggestions, and I've filled out the FIP too as well. Yeah, I think it's a good tool, and I think another way to think about it is less about the elements of the data lifecycle and sort of mapping them to semantic artifacts, but more along the lines of what does a data steward have to think about during each of these stages in the lifecycle relative to the use of semantic technology or things that have been done in the context of the RDA, including things like the FIP. Other thoughts or reactions in the room? So or online, anything? Oh, we have a hand online. Go ahead, Marta.
Yes, so I would like to follow up on this community aspect. So I fully agree that the community should be contacted and asked what they actually need and how they want to make use of whatever they would use. But I still think that there should be a set of recommendations based on this kind of like a community survey that will be then given back to the community. So not that the community would completely decide what and how they do, because this will this would basically just sustain the situation as it is now. So there should be definitely some set of standards that they follow, and they choose the relevant standards for themselves. There should be some kind of like minimal number of standards, like for the minimal metadata. And they should have some tools when they can recognize if they reach this minimum, and this might be okay for them. But if they want to go any step farther, they should also have some recommendations how to do it.
Yes, thank you. Other thoughts or reactions?
I agree on what you said, Marta. So if you can make recommendations on use this standard and not another, that's great. But often people do whatever they like, and so that's why I think that's to me it's one of the key power of FIPS is that you will be able to do a meta-analysis of standard usage across communities and identify commonalities, and then basically if you have 95% of the communities that use the same standard, it becomes an de facto adopted standard. And you can justify that by saying, okay, we had 150 FIPS filled in, they all use that standard, or 95% of them. So, well, for the 5%, please adopt this one. That makes things easier, right? So, but I agree. There needs to be recommendations on specific standard to use, because that makes life easier. Freedom is good, but sometimes it's just messy.
Yeah, so I fully support that we should recommend one thing for the majority of the community, and I think FIP is a really good direction to go. So yeah, I agree with you.
And Marta, you said something about a survey for the community. Could you clarify what you meant by that?
So I think that the community already has data stewards. and the data stewards practically should be responsible for making recommendations locally. So reaching out to the already existing people who are responsible for making recommendations for their own affiliation would be one way to figure out what people are already doing and if they are actually aware of those aspects, because sometimes these data stewards are not part of the bigger community, so they don't make any exchange. They just search and find the first a recommendation they can find, they follow it, and this is not necessarily the best option for them. So I don't know if there is any easy way of reaching out to those kind of persons, but I think that it would be useful to maybe pull them into the group here if we have this kind of connections, and try to make them aware about those standards and try to encourage them to distribute those standards in their own communities already.
Thank you so much. I think we'll go ahead and move on to the data acquisition stage. So here we have leveraging programmatic interfaces, automating the collection of data and metadata, collecting other metadata, in other words, like the condition of the room, temperature, humidity, access control, and ownership. Are there any things that you think are missing from the data acquisition where you have to think about semantic artifacts or the fair data principles? Any reactions either online or in the room to this part of the document? Yeah.
And this is provenance is missing here.
Are you able to add it? Other reactions. What else is missing? Anyone online? Yes.
Linking to relevant entities like referencing their PIDs.
To what PIDs, sorry?
Everything that is relevant to the data that you collect and reference that properly, for instance, the sample by the sample identifier and all those kind of stuff.
Yes. So I think we can add references to referential metadata, links to everything. I think that's a good suggestion. Other suggestions? Anyone online? Okay, I'll keep going. So during data processing, extracting data and metadata from proprietary formats is something that is a major issue. And within the there's a thing called the Materials Research Data Alliance that was sort of launched in the US, and there's a working group that's specifically working on extractors in this space, using non-proprietary file formats, automating data processing pipelines, and provenance. Any thoughts or reactions to the data processing part of the data lifecycle? Anything missing? Anyone online? Yeah.
Yes, hello, my name is Sven Gunnarsson. I'm from Elixir, Norway, so I don't really know anything about the domain here. So I have a question regarding the schemas for metadata schemas. It seems like, I mean, most of this is focused on the ontologies and that, but also you need schemas to collect them in an orderly fashion and standards for that, and how this relates to the file formats. This is some metadata also in file formats, but I assume the metadata schema is something that will live alongside this somehow. Yeah.
So I think to answer your question, so this working group is concerned with all types of semantic artifacts, from ontologies, vocabularies, schemas, sort of community-driven file formats that may have sort of code-based validation. In other words, there's file formats that are validated by like specialized code as opposed to explicit machine actionable schemas. So I think this working group is all of that is within scope. Is there a follow-up? So I think going on under data preservation, thinking about data documentation, versioning, and repository selection. Thoughts or reactions? Anyone online? And then finally with sharing, publishing code, papers, and data. Yes.
At least workflows should be included in publishing.
Can you add it, please? All right. Any closing thoughts before we move on back to the slides? Nope. So let's go back to the slide deck. Stop sharing. All right, so we're going to use this plenary as an opportunity to start thinking about what we're going to do for StreamC. And I just copied and pasted the description of what StreamC is all about, elaborating harmonized terminologies and schemas in material science, and that could entail things of we've had a lot of conversations, a lot of thoughts about doing a materials version of schema.org, and I think maybe we have a critical mass to actually do that. And in the document, we also talk about relationships. So our two lightning talks, one is from me on schema.org, and one is from Jan on mappings. So I'll go ahead and go. So schema.org. So what is schema.org? In case anyone here hasn't heard about it, it's a high-level collaborative community activity to create and promote schemas for structured data on the web. In other words, it's very likely when you visit a web page, behind the scenes, embedded in that HTML is structured metadata that the machines read. You're reading the HTML that's human-oriented, and machines are reading the machine actionable JSON LD or other formats that are embedded within the HTML itself. And one of the questions I asked years ago playing around with schema.org is, what can we do with it out of the box without making modifications? And I'm of the opinion that it's actually quite a lot. So there's a generic data set schema. It's a little hard to read on the screen, but I did the best I could with a screenshot of it. And the data set schema is about giving metadata to a data set that you'd publish on the web. And this markup would be embedded perhaps within the landing page of the data set or within things like an RO crate, for example. But I wanted to point out that although this is high level, there's these elements in here such as a measurement methodology, and that's where we can get material specific very, very quickly. And I wanted to highlight the fact that the measurement method property can have object or expected types of defined term or a URL. In other words, if we have a persistent identifier, one that's resolvable out in the World Wide Web for some measurement methodology, we can point to it with the URL. So I think out of the box, it's potentially very, very powerful and can be leveraged in a very domain-specific way without jumping in and making a bunch of modifications. So the question is, if we need to go beyond, how can we go beyond? And I would point to bioschemas as a wonderful example of how they have extended schema.org and the way they do that. I think I've got just little pointers. So what bioschemas is all about is, again, findability on the web, embedding metadata within landing pages and also maybe within things like RO crates. And they do this by either proposing new types or new profiles on top of over existing types, as well as proposing new properties. So it's an extent. I just wanted to point out that it's an extension of schema.org, and they propose new types and new properties, or use an existing type and put a profile on top of that. And what that means is schema.org data set is a type, and if you give 10 different material scientists the opportunity to use that type without direction, they might come up with 10 different ways of using that data set type. And what a profile is telling you use this existing type in a very specific way. And now I'll hand it over to Tien for his lightning talk. And there's the up-down buttons.
Thank you. Thank you, Zach. Actually, something that was discussed with colleagues, so using schema.org for their system for ocean, there is an alignment that exists with DCAT, actually. So even they are starting to build bridges between schema.org or use schema.org for representation of classical standards. So thank you for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to present the Fair Mapping Working Group. Some of you already have heard what I'm going to say because we had the session this morning for an hour and a half, which was nice because for us it was a kind of kickoff, although we are not yet endorsed by the RDA Technical Advisory Board. The idea was to kickstart some of the discussions. Oop, wrong side. So the idea of this fair mapping, actually, we put that together into two projects, at least Fair Impact, and it's my role in the Fair Impact. I'm leading the task on fair mappings. The idea is that out of the Fair is Fair, we realized that mappings is also an important problem, and mappings as ontologies needs to be fair or semantic artifact. And so basically we've been working on that for about 2.5 years now, together with Jonas, my co-chair in FairCore for EOSC, where they developed the MSCR, which is a mapping cross-rock registry. And so basically together we organized the sessions to present our work at the International Data Week in Vienna last year, right? And we had a bird of a feather session. And the great thing is when we discussed there and presented, first there was a lot of people and basically a lot of different communities, and there's a lot of different use cases for mappings, right? And so we collected really a lot of feedback from the people present. And they want to map everything. They want to map concept class, properties, metadata schema, codes, and so on, right? And so what came out of this is they said, well, why don't you create an RDA working group? And so that's what we did with Jonas. We started the RDA Fair Mappings working group. So we created a charter, which is accessible online. It's now on the RDA website. We are still under TAB review, so we get a first round of review. You are now working on the answer, so it should be pretty straightforward. But we keep organizing meetings and we are kickstarting the work because there is a very nice energy in the group, so we want to keep the momentum with the group. So the problem we address is the fact that mappings are hard to find and use in the current way because they are often scattered across version control systems. So GitHub is fantastic, but finding things in GitHub is a nightmare. So maybe we should suggest GitHub to add more metadata to their inputs. And they are often expressed in formats that are not meant for automated processing because there are a lot of information missing. And in particular, the most common format for mapping is a correspondence table, 2-column, schema 1, schema 2, and they're just a direct correspondence, but you don't know what is the exact relation. So you assume that it's a same as, but sometimes the assumption is really, really flaky. And also we realize that mapping is overused, meaning a lot of people are using mappings for talking about different things. Mapping data tables, mapping metadata schemas, ontologies, and there's no clear classification about the different types. So one of the ideas of the working group is that actually we try to reduce that ambiguity because sometimes you spend half an hour talking with someone that disagrees with you well, it's just because you didn't talk about the same thing. So if you can alleviate that, that would be helpful. So some of the outputs we're planning is actually working together with Fair Impact, improving the recommendations on how you make mapping fair. And then we're also looking at practical frameworks for making mapping in general. So basically collecting from communities inputs on their process of mapping. And then we want to create a harmonized use case collection of mappings. The idea is that use case collection is going to help us actually establish the classification, right, and define proper categories based on the use cases, and then define a generic exchange model so that if you don't use the one that we chose, if you use your own model, basically you could be able to change it or to transform it into a generic model that could be used by others. And the idea is that all this content that we are going to generate in the working group are going to be federated into a mapping knowledge base with the idea that it's becoming a useful resource. So for now, I think the knowledge base is going to be an Excel spreadsheet where you have the links to the different things. That will be okay already because there's nothing that exists. And then we'll see if we can move on and make it more friendly for search. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Are there any clarifying questions to the two lightning speakers? Yes.
This is on the mappings. So I have noticed of late, a lot of people are using like, Gen AI to do mappings essentially between data elements and ontologies. So do you plan to address any aspects of that?
So that's an excellent question. We will if we do have use cases. That's why we are focusing on use case. We need to get concrete use cases with the results that's coming out of this. So, however, it is, I mean, the use case they are going to generate are kind of classical mappings. And so basically it's just the method they use that's going to be different. And so one of the recommendations we make in the FAIR recommendation for any mappings that are simple enough, use SESAM, which is an existing model developed in biomedical community. And in SESAM, you get metadata fields that point to the tool you used. So if you use Gen AI, you just have to fill the information to point to the algorithm you've been using and this kind of documentations. But yeah, so basically the group is open to any kind of mappings. We're not restricted to semantic mappings or the fact that it's done by humans and not by machines, or on the contrary. But our work is going to be based on use cases because that's what we can use and communicate to the people so that we can model this.
Continue on that. Just a little bit. So, and also I think that so one of the outputs of the working group, the format on how to describe the mappings, and one of the motivation is that the working on the work you do on the mappings, or the mappings themselves, they're expensive commodity because it takes a lot of time to make quality mappings, and if you can express them and share them and use them, that's a very efficient way of doing it, instead of million people using those automated tools, those AI tools every single time. That is equally, well, not equally expensive, but it's also expensive compared to using those configurations, those efficient tools that you have made, maybe curated, and so on. So that's one angle.
So just maybe we could talk more when your working group gets going at full speed, right? But CADSR, which is a terminology management system within the NCI, is also working towards having standardized mappings between some ontologies as well as common data models. But this is very specific to the biomedical domain, but maybe...
It's a great use case. So what you're just describing is use case, and what we're trying to say. So for me, yeah.
They're working with FDA. They're working with FDA, a couple of other federal agencies. Would be good.
I think it would be good. So the idea is that the working group is a forum for any organizations working on mappings. So basically, you just come with your use case. Certainly, they have already started doing some mappings, because the first kind of use case we want to focus is on mappings that exist. And these mappings, we're going to look at the mappings in details to see, I mean, what kind of relations you have. Is that just an entity mapping where you say broad or narrow or exact match and this kind of things, or if there are things that deals with data transformation, unit transformation, and these kind of things, so that we create these categories. For each of these categories, we're going to look at the specific kind of relations you need to model in order to represent that, right? Because a mapping is just a triple. It's a source, a target, and a relation that links them, right? And so we want to work on these relations so that in the end, we all use a common model based on SESAM. The only things we change is the core mapping model with those type of relations. Of course, we might have some edge cases that requires much more complex structure, but the idea is that we work on that so that there is a common way of sharing things. Also because SESAM has a tremendous amount of metadata there for mappings, which is very useful. We tested that by asking our colleagues that would work with mapping to actually make a list of all the queries they would make to find mappings. Actually, except for maybe two queries, most of them were fulfilled by the metadata schema that is proposed there. Now, what you're saying is very interesting. I also have a colleague from the UN Stat office that has some mapping things. So if you would be interested to give us the contact or address us the people from this organization, we could try to work together on defining and describing their use case and engage them, because I think it's a global transversal problem for everyone. But thanks for pointers.
Marta, go ahead.
So I have two comments, one question, hopefully will be quick. So first comment is about the first lightning talk, and I think that this is a great idea to come up with something like this MSE schema.org. So having something like this, I think it would be a tremendous actually change in the community when we could actually point people to, like, this is your main schema, please just use it. It's really for you. You don't have to do much. If you don't have something there, you can easily extend it, but this is basically for you, and even have a specific name like this. Yeah, I think that would be really, like, even if it's not a big asset in the sense of, you know, what you create, I think this would be really great. And second comment, you would like to reply?
No, thank you for your vote of support. I was just getting up.
Okay, and the second comment is about the semantic GitLab. I like this idea of trying to add some functionalities to GitLab to make the semantic assets more accessible and findable. And in general, this would do big work for not only for mappings, but also for the whole community trying to keep those assets on GitLab. But the question I have for Jan is about so I was not present in the previous session, well, your morning session, our afternoon session. But I'm curious if you are considering this group as a use case for that, because MSE is internally so diverse that there are already so many differences between different subgroups that even if people use the same top level ontology, they already need mappings between their assets. So I understand. I mean, I'm very happy that you're here. I think I was in Salzburg and there was a meeting about mappings. So since then, I'm thinking about mappings a lot. So only the lack of time is that I didn't get actively involved. But the whole community I work with, they need a lot of mappings, and they just basically this is a topic that always comes up. So my question is that, do you see this group as some kind of like a playground basically for trying those concepts that you have?
Yes, exactly. So we listed actually in our charter the group as one of the group we want to work with. I do remember one of the early presentation when the working group was in the forming, and there were many communities that already have done mappings in material science. So the idea would be, as a collaboration with the group, at least start with those who have gone through the mapping work, so that we can work with their mapping, helping them making the mapping fair. And so they could help us test the recommendation and the feasibility of the recommendations. And in the meantime, we could use that for extending our model. And then the resource that is going to be built from that is going to be useful for all the communities in your group that wants to start the process of mapping, right? Because it is a burden. It's not easy. And then you could reuse some of our outputs, like the practical framework, which is a process for you could follow, or we suggest you follow when you do mappings, with some review process and so on. And so we have documented that, plus of course the fair recommendations. And
Yeah, that's
the,
great. Yeah.
the knowledge base is what we want to make it useful. So basically, all the communities in your group that haven't done mappings, they would be our beta tester for the knowledge base. And if they say, I can't find the information I'm looking for, means we have done a bad job. And that's the kind of feedback we want to get, because we really want to make something useful for all the communities.
Really good. I'm looking forward to that.
All right, thank you. So in the last 2 minutes, I'm going to try to end on time. I put the description of Stream C back on the presentation board. And I think based on conversations today and prior today, I think what this group will really dig into in terms of Stream C is, again, extending schema.org for the material science community. And I think being the first customer to this or the partner to this new working group on mappings. Gerhard, do you want to say any last words before I move on to the thank you slide?
No, also thank you a lot from my side. Yeah, I just put some things also in the collaborative notes. And thanks to you also, Zach, for leading it from there. So please join us on our regular meetings. That's not to you, Zach, but to the others in the audience. And
the cursor is broken, but I'll say the biggest thank you to Athena, who's been helping as the facilitator through the Tiger project. And thank you to everyone here for contributing to this working session. We got a lot of useful input and a lot of interesting and stimulating conversation. So I think let's give everyone a round of applause for everyone. Oh, and it's exactly 2, so you can stop recording.